Hi, you can call me Naive. I'm a collection of ones and zeros amalgamated and beamed directly into your eye holes and ear holes. Welcome to my little corner of the internet. I plan to use this space to be opinionated and ramble about books that come across my path. Whether I got the quote-unquote right meaning is a persistent worry that has kept me from really doing anything like this sooner, but I'm comforted by the fact that meaning's what you make of it. It also helps that I don't really exist outside of whatever screen you're watching this from. Pay no attention to the little trans pulling the strings behind the curtain. Now it's time for some clarification. First off, there's no way to represent Ted Taylor better than McPhee's The Curve of Binding Energy, so I'm definitely not even going to try. If it's not broke, don't fix it. I want to do my best to reflect on the understanding that I gained from the book. I definitely don't want to make it seem like I'm qualified to talk about this from any place of authority. If I just stick to the route of Ted Taylor's biography, I would really be doing a disservice to him and his contributions. I wouldn't be able to illustrate the total impact of the man because I'm not fluent in nuclear physics, and I deliberately want you to look into the abstract interpretations I'm talking about. Plus, in the video's description, I've linked some relevant information to what I'm talking about. Just an appetizer to spark your interest, not justification or proof. Now, I'm not assuming everything is 100% credible, like the UFO disarms nuke link, but I haven't really been able to stop thinking about it since I saw it. Now you can too. Back to Ted. Slapping Ted Taylor into great man theory propaganda is way too broad of a brush to paint with. The desire's strong just based on how interesting of a person he was. He graduated high school at 15. He played with nitrocellulose and sulfuric acid the same age that most kids were learning to ride their bike without training wheels. His intelligence and intuitive nature were critical pieces of him, but I'm not going to be the type to cast him in the light of struggling antisocial genius just for the sake of a cohesive story. He was basically adored and respected by everyone he met. Settings, times, and dates of Ted Taylor's life commingle with flashbacks as a break from the interesting but sometimes tedious technical language, and as a shock absorber to process the implications that are being whispered. This whole book's nonlinear timeline really left room for the reader to cringe at the future. It was watching someone light their way with matches through an abandoned gasoline factory. It was the perfect refutation to the old metric, shut up and calculate. It was understanding that intentions are fluid and not a part of reality, let alone an integral part of the scientific community. Intentions like Ted's "I'll give them what they want and more" mentality dwindled after every subsequent bomb with no signs of slowing down production. He had hoped the new fusion bombs would at least knock some sense into those parties pursuing them the hardest. It wasn't until much later in his life did he say, "I thought I was doing my part for my country. I thought I was contributing to a constant state of peace. I no longer feel that way." Intentions imply consequences, and often cloud the ability to determine what consequences are deemed an acceptable risk, or even possible. Risk is mitigated with well-funded PR teams and privatized information. The understanding of how to use the information has been classified, but if people could find ways to build a bomb without a textbook telling them how, don't be surprised when that technology is rediscovered elsewhere. What are they going to do with that technology? Who will it benefit? Analysis done under the Eisenhower administration for meterless nuclear power found that it would be more expensive than what was already being sold. There was a much larger potential for profit in national safety, more so for the national part and less so for safety. A government monopoly was created. In order to prevent negative public perception and to save money, lackadaisical supply chain security allowed the transfer of nuclear material unguarded on major roadways. Irregular and inaccurate reporting of materials unaccounted for, or MUF, lead to today, where decades of bureaucratic obfuscation pile an unknowable tonnage of nuclear material that goes unaccounted for. Worker safety took the backseat to profitability. And the dollar amount of environmental destruction and human suffering gets discussed as an operating cost instead of the wake-up call it's intended to be. It's seen as this big gesture of retribution and justice. Proportionally, it's a slap on the wrist. Accountability is left to the hands of the future while assigning the task of fixing the slip-ups along the way to a generation that doesn't even exist yet. As a species, we still don't understand object permanence. Collectively, we are infants chewing on a glowing fuel rod and using it to play whack-a-mole. Ted spent the latter half of his life advocating for renewable energy and alternatives to nuclear, at least in the present form. To bastardize a quote from the book, using nuclear material as a heat source is like replacing your gas furnace with one that only runs on Blue Label Johnny Walker. We rightly clown on the idea of the stage in human development where your best bet for survival was pressure cooker power. The way that we harvest nuclear energy today is at a comparable state. Future generations will look back and pity us for being so influenced by what makes the biggest boom. Assuming that there will be future generations to look back in the first place. The power vacuum that will need to be filled due to the ever-increasing global power demands leaves the ground ripe for nuclear energy. It should be clear that oil and gas, the current majority provider of energy, will not regulate themselves out of existence. Despite all the reports you see claiming that fossil fuel companies are shifting investments due to public pressure, or even the financial incentives, the profit motive rules all. Investment outside of quote-unquote core business areas is less than 1%, according to an IEA report from 2020. In my opinion, and unspecified powers of prediction, I think it's going to be more likely that the funding that oil and gas flaunts goes to nuclear before renewables. The potential outcomes for nuclear power are unimaginable. I mean that in the sense of post-scarcity utopia and of irradiated eternal apocalypse. The average person is so saturated in manufactured consent and ignorance that I sincerely doubt they will have the ability to advocate on their own behalf. I doubt that they would even have the ability to see which of those two directions that they're headed in. If you are looking for a cleverly worded and easily quotable information hazard, I would recommend this book. If you think good intentions matter, I would say you need this book. Preferably before we start to see advertisements for Gucci Geiger counters.
Fucking